Jihad has come to America.
Constitute the most devastating series of terrorist attacks in history.
The only deen Allah accepts is Al-Islam. And whoever seeks any other deen apart from Islam will never be accepted.
Allahu Akbar! We stand together to win the war against terrorism.
But you too will make your destruction.
Democracy or theocracy? Is there a solution to the economic and social problems we're facing today? Is a democracy-driven society effective and appropriate to solve these type of issues? Or would a theocratic structured society benefit mankind? Some argue that replacing democracy with theocracy would solve the social, economic, and political problems we see today, while critics claim theocracy-driven society would not solve these types of issues and, among other things, demolish the equality of human rights. And yet others argue that in the case of Islam, we're able to merge together theocracy and democracy by taking portions of Sharia law and implementing it in a democratic society. Is that feasible? We'll hear from advocates of democracy as well as advocates of theocracy, and in tonight's case, Islam and its governing law, Sharia. Joining us now live is Robert Spencer, director of Jihad Watch and author of 10 books, including 2 New York Times bestsellers. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Also with us is Anjem Choudary, a lecturer at the London School of Sharia and an advocate of the implementation of Sharia law globally. Thank you, sir, for joining us. And finally, Abu Bara, who's known for his part in the protests against the Danish cartoons in 2006, for which he served a 4-year prison sentence in the UK for soliciting murder, also joins us from London. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming on tonight's program. We'll get right back right into the show. And again, for our viewers, our lines are open. We're live in ABN. The show is back on ABN every other week, and we're so excited. And our line is 248-416-1300. If you have any questions or comments in tonight's topic, democracy or theocracy. Robert, I'd like to start with you. Of course, you're an advocate for democracy, and yet you see the problems that we are facing, the economic issues, the social issues, all types of issues that this country is facing, yet you still push for a democratic society over this theocratic-driven structure that your colleagues this evening are going to be arguing for. Why is it that despite all these problems we see, that you still favor democracy over theocracy and believe that's a solution?
Well, democracy versus theocracy is really a question of democracy versus the rule by people who claim to have the law of God and to implement it. But of course, not everyone agrees with them. There is no actual theocracy. Theocracy is the rule of God, and God is not, ever since the time of Moses, coming down to earth and directly leading a people. What we have are various people who claim that they have a program that comes from God and that it is their responsibility to implement them. Obviously, not everyone agrees, and so the question is, what is to be done in that case? Now, Islamic law is fundamentally coercive. Unlike Jewish law and Christian law, it legislates for non-believers, and it legislates their oppression and denial of basic rights. The people who are with us tonight, Mr. Choudary and Abu Bara, they want us who are not Muslims, who do not believe that Muhammad is a prophet, who do not believe that the Quran is the book of God, to accept their rule and to equate their rule with the rule of God, even though we do not believe that they actually possess the law of God or a valid revelation from God. Now, the question then becomes, why should their understanding take precedence over ours? Why should what they think is true have any more value than what we think is true? Democracy, to be sure, is imperfect. It is the worst system in the world, as has often been pointed out, except for all the others. But the idea that is fundamental to Western-style democracies of non-establishment of a religion is a very wise principle, because it allows differing people who differ in conscience, as I do tonight with Mr. Choudary, to live together as equals in relative harmony without trying to kill or gain hegemony over the other. In other words, it's predicated upon the mutual respect of all people as human beings, equal in dignity. As such, it conflicts with Islam in that Islam makes a very sharp distinction between believers and unbelievers and does not believe that unbelievers have equality of dignity as human persons with believers. Rather, on the contrary, the Quran says that unbelievers are, in chapter 98, verse 6, the most vile of created beings. And so Mr. Choudary and Abu Bara, they cannot allow for democracy because they do not believe that my judgment or conscience or that other non-believers' judgment or conscience is as valuable as their own. Whereas I, on the other hand, as a believer in the equality of dignity of all human persons, believe that their judgment and their conscience is as valuable as mine. And so I'm willing to grant them a place in a democratic and open system. They are not willing to grant me the same place in their system. In other words, they do not have the humility to grant that others who differ from them deserve respect even in disagreement. I'm not criticizing them personally. I haven't met them, and I'm sure they're marvelously pleasant people in person. But what I'm speaking about is a principle that is within Islam and basic to Islamic law, that Sharia must be imposed upon people whether they like it or not, and that we must accept that as the law of God, even if we don't believe that it's the law of God. Democracy is a far superior system to that in that it grants equal respect to all differing perspectives and all the differing points of view that people may have in terms of what is the ultimate good and what is the best system. And then in a smoothly functioning democracy, people work peacefully to convince others freely of their point of view such that the majority opinion rules, but minority rights are protected. Now, that is fundamentally different from the denial of basic rights that is in the Islamic theocracy, that is fundamentally oppressive in the first place because it demands that we accept its claim to be the law of God, and then oppressive in denying basic rights to women and to non-Muslims.
Robert, why do a lot of Muslims believe that they are being suppressed or oppressed within this democratic society if, in fact, you're saying that it gives equal rights to all?
Well, what they call oppression is the inability to impose Islamic law upon the rest of us. That is a definition of oppression according to Islamic law. As I'm sure that Mr. Choudary will confirm, the idea of the spread of Islam has to be left unimpeded in non-Muslim countries. And any impediment to the spread of Islam, which would conclude simply a rejection of it, constitutes a grounds for Muslims to become violent. And this is, here again, a fundamentally oppressive system. But they are the ones who say that they're being oppressed simply because we do not choose to live by the values that they hold. And we are determined, at least some of us are, to defend the values of the free society upon which our civilization is based.
Thank you, Robert. Anjem, let me turn it over to you if you can. I think a lot of our audience knows that you push for the establishment of Sharia law, which is the Islamic law globally, and you wish to see Islam spread globally and for the West to become an Islamic state. Why don't you give us an overview of why you believe this country should be governed under a theocracy?
Yes, good evening. And thank you once again for having me on your program. It's always a pleasure to discuss Islam and to discuss our situation nowadays, especially in light of what's taking place in terms of your own foreign policy and the fact that Muslims obviously are very politicized nowadays. Wherever you look in the world, we have some kind of conflict taking place, whether in Iraq or Afghanistan, indeed, even in Somalia, and who knows, maybe even the American government are about to attack Iran. Now, Robert Spencer, obviously, has studied Islam from a Western perspective. In Islam, we call him an Orientalist, somebody who studied Islam, obviously, in order to give his counter-argument. But let me explain what Islam is about. Islam is submission to the commands of the Creator. Therefore, the Muslim is the one who submits. Now, unlike Christianity or Judaism or indeed Sikhism or Hinduism or any other ism or schism, Islam is not a secular belief. In other words, we do not say, as Muslims, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's and give unto God what is God's. Rather, as Muslims, we believe the whole of the society, including Caesar, must implement the Sharia. So Caesar would be a Muslim, he will have authority, and the Sharia will be implemented. Now, Robert talks about democracy. Now, you may know that when the thinkers arose against the hegemony of the church a few hundred years ago, yes, certainly there was a lot of oppression, a lot of injustice. And that is why they overthrew the corruption of the church and the, the patriarchy and the dictatorship that you had at that time. And really, post the Renaissance and the Industrial Revolution, the capitalist model that we can see nowadays implemented in Britain and in France and in America, for example, has only really been there for the last 100 or 200 years. Now, if we make a comparison between that and Islam, the Sharia as a law and order was in fact implemented from the time of the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam until the 3rd of March 1924, when it was destroyed, in fact, and dismantled at the hands of the British and the French and their stooge Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. Now, that's a brief overview of history. So you can see, in fact, that unlike Christianity, which was a complete failure, really, when it was implemented within society and there was a lot of oppression, in fact, you find that the golden period, in fact, in our own history was when the Sharia was implemented. So if you look, for example, in the heart of Europe, for over 800 years in Spain, the Sharia was implemented. And I'm sure that Jews and the Christians will agree that was the golden period for them. Indeed, when the oppression and the Inquisition took place in Spain under Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, the Christians ran to the Islamic State in Africa, in fact, for protection, because Islam guarantees the protection of the rights, free food, clothing, and shelter for every citizen. The non-Muslims, their life, their wealth, their honor is protected. And indeed, it was never the policy of the Muslims when the Sharia was implemented to destroy the churches or the synagogues. Salman, if you look, for example, in Damascus, if you look in places like Beirut, the churches are still there for over 1,000 years. Why is that the case? Because it's not our policy to bury people in mass graves and to have that kind of ethnic cleansing that you see nowadays, for example, in Ayodhya in India, or you see in Palestine, or you see in Kosovo, or indeed you see, in the conflicts that you see, for example, in Iraq, how the American soldiers are coming in and they're destroying the places of worship. So I think you need to make a distinction between what the Muslims under the Sharia did for this world and, in fact, what is being done in the name of Hinduism or Sikhism or Christianity. Islam is a complete way of life. It is an ideology in the sense that is similar to capitalism or communism, in that it is not something, if you like, relegated or restricted to the masjid or the mosque or the temple or the church. It is something which must be implemented within society. Now,
okay,
you may look around.
We have to turn it back over to Robert, but just a quick follow-up question. If, in fact, Sharia is the solution for all of mankind, why don't we see the problems in the countries that Sharia is the official rule of law for, like Yemen, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and places like that? We still see problems there, and you're saying that Sharia that's governing those countries is not solving those problems there.
Yeah. Actually, what we have today, in fact, is 55 so-called Muslim countries, none of which implement the Sharia. The last time we had the Sharia was before the 3rd of March 1924. But these countries are monarchies.
Sharia is the official basis for state laws in those countries.
Yeah. Well, can I just finish this point, please, Simon? Because, those countries are dictators, many of them, in fact, propped up by the likes of the American regime or the British regime. They give lip service to the Sharia. But if you want to see how the Sharia functioned, you have to go before the 3rd of March 1924. But I'd like to make just one point, if you don't mind, as a throwback to Robert, because if you look at the facts, in fact, of our current state of play, if you look at the bastion, in fact, of freedom and democracy, and this will only take 1 minute, we can see, for example, under the so-called democracy that we have nowadays, a quarter of the women, for example, in America, suffer rape or physical assault in their life. Somebody is sexually harassed every 2 minutes. A woman is battered every 15 seconds. 500,000 robberies annually. 50,000 women and children are trafficked in the US, for sexual exploitation. It has the worst online child sex abuse, and I could go on. The fact is, these are the real fruits of Western civilization and the democracy in practice. You will never find that under the Sharia in our history.
Okay, so let me ask then your colleague, do you think that Sharia would abolish all of these issues that Anjem has just listed?
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله Muhammadan abduhu wa
English,
rasul.
please.
I testify that there is none worthy of worship beside Allah, and that Muhammad is the final messenger of Allah. And in answer to your question, I would like to go back to some common ground between all of us. Allah ordered us to say to Christians and Jews and the people that are watching this show tonight, to come to a common ground, a common word that is between both of us. All of us, we agree, Muslims, Jews, Christians, that there is none worthy to be worshipped except for the one Creator that created all of the heavens and the earth, who created Adam and Eve and created all of the prophets. And he sent them as messengers to the people to remind them of one thing: not to take each other as lords instead of Allah, instead of God, instead of the Creator. Not to make ourselves the legislators or the people to be in charge and in authority over the others. Rather, for us to submit and worship only God, to follow His laws, to follow His commands. That is something common among all people.
Sir, we know that. We know what's common among people who believe in one God. But if you can just get to...
So from this point, if we agree that we are all obliged to follow and obey only God and to submit to His commands, submit to His laws, that means we can never take on the role of the Creator, because for the Creator it's His role to be the legislator, to be the commander, the one who makes laws and governs the affairs of the people. So if we were to take on the role of God, that is the greatest oppression. When we try to say that we can take laws into our own hands and man can make law. Because democracy is what? Democracy has got nothing to do with freedom, it's got nothing to do with fairness or justice. It is talking about taking the law into the hands of man. The law of man, for man, by man. That is the principle of democracy. It's got nothing to do with due process or anything like this. This is something that Western democracies, they will take and they will leave as it pleases them. But the fundamental difference between democracy and Islam is that Islam says, go back to that principle we all agree on as anybody created by God, that we can only worship God and follow and obey His commands and allow His laws to govern our affairs. It is not permissible and it is not wise at all for man to ever to take the laws into their own hands. So yes, like Robert said, of course we do not trust the conjecture and the ideas of a fallible man, whether Muslim or non-Muslim, to make the laws and to decide themselves how the people should be governed and what should be legal, what should be illegal. And if we leave it into the hands of man, we get the problem that we have today, which I'm sure even the audience who are majority Christian, I'm sure, they would agree with us, that pornography should be illegal. But it's illegal under democracy because man can do what they want. And when man does what they want, they enjoy things like democracy. They enjoy things like adultery and fornication. They enjoy things like alcohol and being drunk. They enjoy things like lying and backbiting and slander. They enjoy all of the things which they believe under their freedom of speech they can do, under the freedom of their own expression they can do. They believe under the freedom of their own, their own freedoms, they believe that it should be okay to do all of these crimes, which under any prophet, whether Jesus or Moses or Muhammad, was prohibited by God, and it was a law laid down for all of mankind.
So Abu Bara, isn't it though inevitable? Isn't it inevitable to take the law of Allah into your own hands, and you're committing the same crime that you're accusing people who wish to see democracy or follow democracy by how they interpret the law of Allah? How can an imperfect man perfectly interpret a law from a perfect God? So are you not doing the same thing that you're accusing?
Because under democracy, man makes the laws. Man will decide themselves what should be legal or what should be legal, and they will change their mind. If you want to say that democracy has certain freedoms, today they say those freedoms include to be homosexual, if you wish, that is legal, and it is freedom, considered to be something which is civilized under the current Western democracy. And they believe even that drunkenness, adultery, all of these are legal. 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, they would not have said the same thing. So
yeah, but what I'm trying to understand, Abu Bara, and then we have to turn it to Robert, what I'm trying to understand is you said that nobody should and nobody can mess with the law of Allah. It's one law, it's divine, it comes down, it has to be implemented. How can a human who is imperfect translate that and implement it in one way, in Allah's way? Because in your Muslim community alone, there are so many different translations or interpretations of Islam. So isn't it inevitable to be messing with this law that you call Allah's by simply establishing this type of a structure? And then we have to turn it to Robert.
Hello?
Yes, are you with us?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, so the law of Allah is not, as you think, some kind of riddle that we have to decipher. The law of Allah has some verses and some ahkam, which are some rules which maybe they need further interpretation, but the main majority of the basic fundamental rules of the society to govern the affairs of society, they are explicit laws, explicit in meaning, explicit in their own indication, with no ambiguity about them whatsoever. And there are things which I'm sure even you as Christians, you believe as well, that are explicit. There's nobody will question the prohibition of adultery, of homosexuality, of lesbianism, the prohibition of pornography, the prohibition of gambling, the prohibition of all of these kind of crimes, which everybody agrees is explicitly forbidden by God. But under democracy, man has the right to take it into their own affairs. And when that happens, then you will get the chaos that you have today, because they will make legal whatever pleases them. And what pleases man is not something that's going to be good for everybody. The democracy is completely weak and useless when it comes to preventing the people from committing crimes. When the people are poor, they want to gamble.
Okay.
Under democracy,
we understand your point. Thank you, Abu Bara. Robert, I want to turn it over to you because we have to actually head to our first break in a few minutes here, but I'm still not quite getting, his answer when, if God is bringing down the law, obviously he cannot govern it himself. He's relying on his people who are human to implement this law. Isn't it inevitable to have a corrupt or different ways to view this law? So how do we know which is the right law or which is the right Islam to follow?
Well, when you're talking about Islamic law, you have the madhhab, the schools of jurisprudence that are in Sunni Islam, the Shafi'i, Maliki, Hanafi, and Hanbali schools that have elaborated very, very specific laws for pretty much every aspect of human behavior. As Anjem said, Islam is a total way of life. And they agree on about 75% of the things that they say that God has legislated in this way. So it's not really an issue of how do you find Sharia. The question is that both of these gentlemen are assuming that Sharia really is the law of God. And I may agree with Abu Bara that the Creator is the source of all legislation, but if I don't believe, and I certainly don't, that the Quran is a book from God or that Muhammad was a prophet, if Muhammad is not even certain to have existed, or that the fact that the Muslims or the Arabs stormed out of Arabia and began conquering countries in the 630s, and they didn't mention Muhammad or Quran or Islam until the 690s, it becomes very questionable, and neither did the people that they conquered. They had no idea. They never called them Muslims. They called them Saracens or Hagarenes or Ishmaelites. They had no idea that they were bringing a new prophet and a new religion. The whole thing was created later in order to justify the political system that had been created by these conquests. Muhammad was not a prophet. Muhammad may not even have existed. The Quran is not a book of God. It is a book that was cobbled together from various Christian and Jewish sources. And so if I believe this, why is Abu Bara's opinion, why is Anjem Chowdary's opinion about what the law of God is more valuable than mine? And why should their way of life be imposed upon me? The fundamental virtue of the idea of non-establishment of a religion is that people with differing views can live together in peace, unless, of course, you have people like Anjem Choudary and Abu Bara wanting to kill me because of the statements that I just made, and wanting to oppress me because I do not accept Muhammad as a prophet, and forcing me to live in the mandated second-class status that Islam does command for non-Muslims under the rule of Islam. It's interesting to note that Anjem Choudary says that Muslim Spain, Al-Andalus, was a golden age, when actually that was precisely where Jews and Christians had to know their place. And there was, as a matter of fact, a Jew who was appointed in the year 1066 in Granada to be a local governor. And the Muslims rioted and killed 4,000 Jews because they knew that for him to hold authority over Muslims was in contradiction to the submissive status that the Jews had to have according to the Quran in the Islamic State. and that his being appointed to this governing position was therefore a violation of that. And they murdered 4,000 Jews. So this is hardly a golden age. The matter of fact, at the dawn of the 20th century, there were 17 million Jews in Christian Europe and 1 million Jews in the Islamic world. And it's clear they were voting with their feet. They knew where life was better. Now, the point, however, here is not really about Christianity at all. It's interesting that they both talk so much about Christianity when this is not a question of Christianity versus Islam. This is about democracy versus theocracy. And it's the key question then is Islam really the law of God? If Islam really were the law of God, then sure, society ought to be oriented according to it. But if Islam is not the law of God, or if there's significant numbers of people who do not believe that Islam is the law of God, then it is fundamentally oppressive for the law of Islam to be imposed upon those people. Abu Bara said right before the end there that Islamic law prevents people from committing crimes, and that's certainly true. Islamic law does prevent people from committing crimes. It prevents them from committing crimes by making the punishment so draconian that people are afraid to commit crimes. They don't want to be stoned to death. They don't want to get their hand amputated, and so on. It's not an empire of virtue. It's an empire of fear. Virtue is not committing a crime because you know within yourself that it is not good for yourself or good for the other person to commit the crime. And so you choose the good freely. And that you can do in a democratic state. You know, it's easy. We can sit here all night and repeat statistics about rape or battering of women, and I think it's ironic that I can't come back with statistics about rape or battering of women from Muslim countries because they aren't kept, and because Islamic law forbids a woman to refuse her husband's sexual intercourse at any time and for any reason, and it mandates the beating of disobedient women in the Quran itself. And so they don't keep statistics about battering women because they don't care. But in any case, it prevents people from committing crimes, but then you either have the choice of an empire of fear that prevents people from committing crimes by terrifying them into not committing them, or you have a society in which there are people who are not virtuous, but in which virtue is possible. And that's a democratic system in which there is non-establishment of a religion. Obviously, that creates for much more of a flowering of the human spirit, and that's why the Western secular countries are far more prosperous and far more stable than the countries in the Islamic world that are ruled by Islamic law. And they are certainly ruled by Islamic law. Saudi Arabia is one that you didn't mention, but also the ones that you mentioned, Pakistan, and now Islamic law is in the ascendancy and will probably be implemented in Egypt. It's already also in Iran. And it's interesting to note that Anjem says none of those countries are really Sharia. None of those countries are really Islamic law. You have to go back to before March 3rd, 1924 and the abolition of the caliphate to find real Islam. Okay, well, if you have to go back into history, you can find plenty of examples of the oppression and the terrorization and brutalization of women and non-Muslims under Islamic law before 1924. But in these states now, also you find it. And it kind of reminds me of when I was in college and I knew this communist, and I started to ask her about these various statistics of millions of people killed under communism, and she would say, oh, those states, the Soviet Union, Maoist China, not really communism. Communism is something that we haven't really seen yet, but it's really wonderful. Well, the fact is we have seen communism and we have seen Sharia. We've seen Sharia implemented, it's implemented now, and it's anything but wonderful.
Thank you, gentlemen. We do have to take our first break. Of course, our lines are open, 248-416-1300. Feel free to call us live in the studio here on ABN. We'll take a 30-second break. We'll be right back, and we'll begin right with your phone calls, and then we'll turn it over to Anjem. We'll be right back.
أنا ما أعرف التسميات اللي بتتقال دي علماني ليبرالي مش عارف أنا ما أعرفش الكلام ده. أنا أعرف حاجة من الاثنين. المسلم يحب دينه ويعز دينه ويتحب إن الإسلام يحكمه لأنه مسلم. اللي يكره دينه يبقى كافر. واحد بيقول لك أنا مش عايز الإسلام يبقى كافر. ما بحبش الدين يبقى كافر. ربنا ما يحكمناش يبقى كافر. الإسلام ملوش لازمة عندنا النهاردة ده يبقى كافر. شوف يا حبيبي لازم يكون في انفصال بين الحق وبين الباطل، في جنة وفي نار، في إيمان وفي كفر، في مسلم وفي كافر. ما فيش حاجة اسمها ديمقراطية. الديمقراطية قائمة على أسس كفر. 10 مبادئ للديمقراطية كلها كفر. حرية التدين، حرية الاعتقاد، وده عندنا حد الردة. الحكم للشعب مش لله، المال مال الشعب. ما تعملش راسك براسي. ما يجيش واحد يطلع يقول لك المواطنة بالحقوق الكاملة والمتساوية. مين قال كده؟ ازاي تساوي أقلية بأكثرية؟ ازاي تساويني وتقول لي حقوق كاملة ومتساوية؟ يعني أنا ابن مسجد هو ابن كنيسة؟ مين اللي يقول كده يا أخي الكريم؟
Jihad has come to America.
Constitutes the most devastating series of terrorist attacks in history.
The only deen Allah accepts is Al-Islam. And whoever seeks any other deen apart from Islam will never be accepted.
And we stand together to win the war against terrorism.
But you too will make your destruction.
Welcome back to the program. For those of you who have friends who want to watch this show or other shows that ABN produces, like Jesus or Muhammad, Debate Night, News and Views with Pastor Joseph, make sure you refer them to abnsat.com, where all resources and information and all the videos are uploaded there. You can feel free to refer your friends there. Also, again, our phone lines are open, 248-416-1300. Anjem, before we get to you, let's take our first few phone calls here, and then we'll get back to tonight's topic. Right now we have Marcos on air with us. If you can keep your questions short so that we can get through the calls and get right back to our topic tonight, we'd appreciate it, but go right ahead with your question when you're ready.
Yeah, hi, how are you?
Very good, thank you.
Good. Just have a few questions for the guy who, from London, England, that was Sharia man.
Anjem, our friend Anjem.
Yeah. It does mean if you have a Sharia, if I'm a rich, the Sharia telling me I can go to the poor family. They have an 8-year-old daughter and married her. That's a first. Second, why don't you give me second chance if I steal something before he cut my hand? Okay? I give me second chance and ask me why I steal. Maybe I'm poor. Maybe because there's no welfare the one you collecting it guys in England and in Europe and in Canada and America. Because there's no welfare in the whole Middle East. And I have no money to buy some food for my kids. And the life forced me to steal. Why don't you help me before you cut my hand? Is that a religion from God? I believe from my, not because I'm a Christian, God be my witness. Okay, but what I believe, this kind of law of any religion, even was Jesus' religion, he said that I won't believe him at all. Before you cut my hand, solve my problem. And plus, do me a favor, don't laugh when the guy talking about the Christianity and the Jesus. Go read the Bible really good and find out how much Jesus tries to help you before he helped anybody else, which is you Muslim. You need him more than I'm a Christian, I need him. He want to show you the right way to go to him. He give you the heaven. He tell you the peace. While you talking about the peace, that Islam made a peace, Islam never made a peace.
Thank you, Brother Marcos. Thank you for calling. We have to take our next call. We appreciate you calling into the show. Let's go to our next call, and then I know, Anjem, you might want to comment on that last call. Our next call actually is from Sheikh Jawad. He's a leader from Dearborn, Michigan, and I asked him to come on and sort of share his opinion on democracy or theocracy from a moderate Muslim's point of view. In about 1 minute, if you can tell us, Sheikh Jawad, what are your thoughts if you've been following the program so far?
Thank you for inviting me for your show, Summer. Let me just explain. In the Shia 12er, we do not have any problems, neither with theocracy nor with democracy. We believe that theocracy is the rule of God. And in other words, the Lord God, the one that had made us, he had set certain rules and regulations that we should organize our lives, organize our society, organize the marriage, organize the work, and so forth. Where does democracy come into the picture? The democracy comes into the picture when we say, وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَى بَيْنَهُمْ. Once it gets to the individual or it gets to a certain society, then we have to look at the society's capabilities or that person's capabilities. And then the democracy comes in a form to fit that person or to fit that society or community or so forth. Let me kind of give a quick example. If the Lord said that you have to fast during the month of Ramadan, let's say that the person was sick, then if the person was sick, then he is not supposed to be fasting. Let's say that the person has to pay $1,000 for his religious taxation. A Muslim has to pay khums and zakat. But if a person is incapable, then the society or the religious leaders must pay him. So we think of democracy as وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَى بَيْنَهُمْ, or the rules by the people that fits in God's rules and regulations. Now, it goes hand in hand beautifully, not the rules of Robert. And I do also agree with Anjem when he said that these are so-called Muslims. When there is a so-called Muslims, where is God's ruling in that?
Wait, I thought you were a moderate Muslim. I brought you on for a different perspective, a different point of view. So you're saying that even though democracy has arrived here in the West, that Sharia would be more important or more appropriate?
I think that both should go hand in hand.
So we can merge Sharia and democracy, is what you're saying,
Right,
is what you believe.
exactly. We should apply both hand in hand. Otherwise, none of them will be useful.
Yes.
But I believe, yes.
Thank you, Sheikh, for calling. I wonder if Anjem would agree if you can have democracy and Sharia in the same system, and if Robert would agree if you could have democracy and Sharia within the same system. Before I turn it over to our gentleman, let's take our third call and final call. We have somebody from Germany on with us. Who do we have on air?
Hello. My name is Alfred. I'm calling from Germany. I have one question to Mr. Anjem.
Yes. Oh. Sir, if you can call back, Brother Albert. Sorry, we must have lost you. Let me turn it to Anjem, and then we'll turn it over to Robert. Go ahead, Anjem.
Yes, first of all, I'd like to say Sheikh Jawad is talking about the concept of shura. And certainly there is something called shura within the Sharia where you consult with the Muslims in the area of permissibility. But I think that you need to make a distinction between shura, which is in the area which is allowed in Islam, an area where, there's no direct request to do or not to do. Therefore, you can have a choice, for example, either eat apples or oranges. This is an area where, you can consult the Muslims and you can make the best decision. But there's a world of difference between that and deciding whether or not, for example, to cut the hand with a thief or to declare jihad, for example, to defend the life, honor, and property. These things are very clear. So I think we need to make a distinction between shura and what people call, if you like, shurocracy, and try to merge shura with democracy. The second thing I would say is the first caller talked about cutting the hand of the thief. For your information, in 1,302 years of the Sharia being implemented, less than about 200 hands were ever cut. And the reason for this is because we did provide the basic needs for the people. Very famously, in the time of Umar bin al-Khattab, radiyallahu anhu, the second Khalifa, he did not implement parts of the hudud, the penal code, when there was drought and famine within the Islamic State. Therefore, we must ensure that the social and economic justice is provided for the people before you implement the penal code. And there are very strict, if you like, conditions before the hand can be cut or, the adulterer can be stoned. There were less than 60 adulterers ever stoned in 1,300 years. And you may think, that there are no statistics, but these statistics are in the judiciary and in the records. So this is the point I would like to make about the cutting the hand of the thief. The third point I would like to make about what Robert Spencer said before the break is that in fact the ahadith, the sayings of the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, are in fact meticulously recorded. Even the Quran was written down contemporaneously. And this is the difference between Islam and Christianity, because we all know that the Gospels, in fact, were not even chosen until at least 300 years later by the Council of Nicaea. So there's no comparison between your text, which has many, many versions, and Islam, the Quran and the Sunnah are written down contemporaneously. The reason why I was smiling so much is because Robert wants on the one hand to talk about Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, on the other he wants to say he didn't even exist and people didn't even talk about him, you know, and he wants to hide as well behind a fig leaf, which is 4,000 Jews apparently killed in 1066 by a governor. I don't even want to get into the Inquisition, because you know and I know in the name of Christianity we're talking about hundreds and thousands of people, you know, killed, you know, in the Inquisition by the Christian Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand. So let's not talk about comparison in terms of the historical kind of slaughter that has been carried out in the name of Islam or in the name of Christianity. And finally, what I would like to say is that you know, my invitation tonight, you know, for people who are listening and watching this program, for the Christians and for even people of other religions and denominations, is look at the divine text. See if Islam agrees with your nature as a human being, and if it does, you know, look into the Quran and the sayings of the Prophet, and you will find, in fact, that Islam is not like the Orientalist version that Robert Spencer wants to give you, or some of the other versions that you've heard tonight.
Anjem,
but in fact,
we cannot have a call to
it agrees
Islam
with your natural
on a
disposition.
Christian station. I'm sorry, we cannot have a call to Islam on a Christian station. I try to accommodate more than enough differing views on the program, but we cannot have a call to Islam on a Christian station. I apologize. But, well, I don't apologize as a Christian, but you know what I mean. Let me turn it over to Robert. You can go ahead and say what you need to say, but please comment on the consequence for a theft and his hand being cut off, or her hand being cut off, because this is it's an example of a very controversial aspect of Sharia that, okay, just because less than 200 or less than 300 cases have been spotted, therefore it is legitimized within Islam.
Well, in the first place, the statistics that Anjem is retailing are very entertaining, but they have no basis in fact whatsoever. There certainly were no reliable records kept all the way through the centuries of the many people who were stoned to death for adultery or whose hands were cut off for theft. These records simply don't exist, and so he is taking the very sketchy records that do exist in one particular time and place and saying that's all that was ever done. It's ridiculous on its face. And also ridiculous on its face is his claim that that Christianity is responsible for more deaths than Islam, when Islam and jihad has murdered millions of people all across North Africa, into Spain, in Eastern Europe, in India, and so on. The statistics are plain to see that while it's hard to nail down exact figures, that you're talking about easily hundreds of millions of people. Now, as far as the idea of theft at all, well, actually, there's several things, but the idea of the amputation for theft in the first place, Anjem spent a lot of time explaining that very few people were actually had their hands amputated for theft, as if that makes it okay. And I think that's very strange. And he talks about how these things were not implemented in many places because justice was put in place before the penal code was implemented. And now, wait a minute. This is supposed to be the law of God. I thought we were talking about the law of God here, what he believes is the law of God. If it's the law of God, then it is identical with justice. So how can you implement justice aside from Sharia? And if you are implementing justice and then putting in Sharia, then you're admitting that Sharia is not quite just. And when you're saying that, oh, well, only a few people had their hands amputated, only a few people were stoned to death, then you're admitting there's something wrong with amputating hands and stoning people to death. You're admitting that you know that. And so you're admitting that you know that what you're claiming to be the law of God is not the law of God, and it's not just. Because if it were, then you would say, yeah, more people should have their hands amputated. All the thieves should have their hands amputated, and it's a positive good. But when you start to say, oh, no, we didn't really implement that most of the time, or just a few people, and then you're acknowledging tacitly, you're implying that you know there's something wrong with this. Also, he spoke about the fact that I say Muhammad probably did not exist, and then I'm saying what Muhammad said and did. Obviously, he's just dodging. I'm sure he understands what is going on here, but I'll explain it anyway. The historical records of Muhammad, the Hadith, They date from the 9th century. The Quran is not mentioned by anybody, Muslim or non-Muslim, until the 8th century. And so the idea that these things were 7th century products is complete fiction. But they are the basis of Islamic belief, and so we can and must indeed talk about what the Quran says and what Muslims say that Muhammad said and did. But in fact, these things have no historical basis. And as far as Christianity goes, I can't let it go by. The Gospels were chosen long before the Council of Nicaea. They were set before the end of the 1st century. And so there's actually no comparison in historical value between Christianity with the Gospels being written and set within the lifetime of the Apostles, and Islam, when it's not until hundreds of years later we start hearing about Muhammad and the Quran. And very few people know this, but this is why I've written my upcoming book, Did Muhammad Exist? It sets it all out in there.
I'm so enjoying the dynamics between you two gentlemen, but we have to give an opportunity also to Abu Bara. So go right ahead, Abu Bara, with any additions, then we'll take our next call.
Thank you. And I'm glad that Robert wanted to raise the topic of cutting the hands and what Anjem said regarding implementing the justice in the Sharia before the need arises for to cut anybody's hand. But I don't think he understood at all what he meant. But before I start, I would just want to say that I do hope that I will be allowed to speak because obviously this is a debate regarding democracy and against theocracy, which one is better. And so obviously, as Robert is claiming that Islam is not a superior way of life and claiming that democracy is superior to Islam, of course we need to make our point and be able to say and make it clear and to prove our own case. And if I am a bit worried that if I do make my case and I do refuse Robert, that you're actually going to cut me off the way you did with Anjem, saying that it's a call to Islam. But I mean, I think if we're here to debate and say that one is better than the other, then of course you have to allow me to make my case that Islam is a superior way of life. Now, regarding cutting the hands of the thief and in comparison to democracy, the problem we have in democracy is you have a society riddled with theft. Robert mentioned that the people, they don't steal under Islam because out of fear, of course, because it lays down the deterrent. But it's not only a deterrent that we lay down. Rather, there is, before any deterrent is required, there is a war against poverty. Umar al-Khattab, he said that if poverty was a man, he would kill him. Meaning, we will not allow the people to live in poverty. We will make sure that they are fed, that they are clothed, that they are sheltered. Like the caller was asking about, there's the basic fundamental principle of Islam and the Sharia is that the people have rights to be fulfilled, and that is the main purpose and the objective of the Sharia is to protect the life of the people, the wealth of the people, the honor of the people, the mind of the people, and the religion of the people. So we have to be able to guarantee that the people are not hungry. That's why Imam Ali, one of the first rules of Islam, he declared that the Jews and Christians living in the lands of Islam is that if any one of them was to become old, or if he was disabled, or if he was blind, then his pension is from the Bayt al-Mal, from the money of the Muslims. We will provide for them, make sure that their rights are guaranteed. That is something never existed in the history of Islam, in a history of Britain or America or the West. In fact, in America now, many people are starving. Many people are homeless. The streets of London are riddled with the homeless people who turn to drugs, who turn to gambling, who turn to stealing and robbing. And the problem is, we have problems in society which don't want to be solved under democracy. But under Islam, we solve them from the roots. Not just by punishing whoever we like, no. By solving from the roots. Remove the poverty, remove the gambling, then you will not have anybody needing to steal anymore. You will remove the need or the temptation for the people to steal or to take the rights of the others or to oppress or to extort money from others. Remove all of this. And not only that, obviously we impress inside them the fear of God. You tell them that they were about the verses of the Quran, let them live in an atmosphere which is God-fearing, an atmosphere where the people, they do not look to each other in the way that people in the West, they look to each other under democracy, with the mentality of freedom, I can do whatever I like. No, rather people, they fear God. And those people who, they do not fear God, because there will always be an element of society, as I'm sure you will agree, that will not fear God. Like you said, indeed, we are fallible human beings. Some of us will become corrupted. Some of us will disobey God. Some of us will go against what God created and try to falsely interpret things. But unlike in democracy, we don't just say if the rulers and the governments and the politicians become corrupted and they take bribes and they start to oppress the people, or if the people start to steal from each other, leave them alone or give them a slap on the wrist. No. And Islam believes you need to punish them. And this is how society is free from the crimes and the problems that you have in society. The reason why so few hands were cut was not because we don't want to implement the hudud. We're willing to cut the hand of anybody. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he removed the problem that the Jews and Christians faced before, and all the secular people today they face is what? That when somebody rich and famous or noble commits a crime, nobody wants to punish them. But if somebody poor wants to commit a crime, they punish them. That's what the Prophet Muhammad said, that if even my daughter was to steal, I'll cut her hand. Muslims are willing, yes, the Sharia will implement the law to cut the hand of the thief on the one who stole from a private place, secure place, breaking into it. A significant amount of money, more than a quarter of a dinar, which is, 1 dinar is 4.25 grams of gold. And not only that, it was not stolen from her own husband or from the money of the government, where the people that have a share of that, nor was they in a time of famine or poverty or war, nor was the man hungry, not given the right. If somebody, despite all his rights being met, he still went to steal, yes, we will implement the law upon him. But why were so few hands cut? Because nobody was poor. Nobody had this poverty.
Okay.
Nobody had this need. And that's the reason why you didn't need to cut the hand, because there were no thieves.
I think I've given you enough time, but you still have not demonstrated how does Islam honor the life and honor of a person through these types of acts, through these types of treatments.
Sorry, say again?
Well, you said that Islam honors the life of a person as opposed to democracy. How so if you are if you're disciplining somebody who is poor and whatever, and steals or does whatever, commits whatever crime by cutting off their hand, or for a non-believer, not non-Muslim, they are considered an infidel and they're subjugated and so forth. How is that honoring the life of a person? Let's talk about the Muslim life first, and then we talk about, okay, what life are you talking about as a non-Muslim?
Of course, Muslim or non-Muslim, under Islam, their rights are protected. Now, how does the capital punishment, for example, for murder, protect the life of the people? Why? Simple. Because you stop people committing murder. Because the whole point of the punishment in Islam is to be a deterrent for the crime and to give justice for the one who committed the crime. In the democracy, under the freedom, if somebody breaks into your home to steal and maybe even rape your own children, God knows what they will do. If you were to shoot them in your own home, you will be arrested. You will be considered to be murdered. And you will be punished. And you have no protection for your own rights. Under Islam, if somebody was to enter your home, you have sanctity for your own home. You can defend yourself. If somebody was to murder you or murder your own family member, then they will have justice and they will have capital punishment.
You murder your own people. You murder your own people if they leave Islam. They're considered what? Apostates. What's the penalty for apostasy? It's death. Is that not murder?
I'm going to finish my point. Apostasy, somebody commits a big crime like apostasy, pedophilia, rape, murder. Somebody commits a big crime that deserves capital punishment. You have to punish them. And under democracy, you leave them to go free, and they go out and they rape again. We see it time and time again. Hundreds of thousands of pedophiles in the streets. They come out and they commit another rape.
So freedom of religion. You keep giving the example of pedophilia, but the freedom of religion is therefore qualification or a basis for an extreme type of discipline as death or murder.
The proof of that, how it works, is exactly what Robert Spencer admits and what Anjem mentioned clearly.
Okay.
The fact that people, they don't commit the crimes out of fear, out of deterrence. The whole point, even the legal system under democracy, they believe in deterrence, but they don't work.
And I wonder what would happen to all the Muslims who are leaving Islam if this were a Sharia-driven society and if they would be followed after and killed. But I want to turn it to Robert. Let's take our next call, and then we'll bring it back to Robert. Right now we have Mohammed on air with us. Welcome, Mohammed. What's your question?
Yeah, hi there. Obviously, first of all, I'd like to make a couple of points. First of all, towards the two speakers in London, Anjem Choudary, or Sheikh Anjem Choudary and Sheikh Abu Bara. Obviously, I can't commend them on their diligent work for calling for the Sharia and working for it. And I hope a statement that one day the black flag of Islam over the White House will come true in our lifetime. But my question or comment is directed more towards Mr. Spencer, who seems to have a skewed understanding of history. And I think he loses all credibility when he even doubts the existence of someone like the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who obviously, even historically, by Western historians have spoken about him as a great man. He can refer to Bernard Lewis. Even there's one of his contemporaries who wrote a book called The 100 Most Influential People in History. the first person in that book is the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So on that point, he loses credibility in even speaking about Islam. Secondly, in terms of democracy and what it's given us and its fruits, what I can add, democracy is just an opium for the people, so that the American hegemony can increase all over the world, so that consumerism and the new global world order can spread, and the people can believe that this is something that we need to aspire to. Democracy doesn't exist. I think the argument is completely wrong. What we have today is an oligarchy where you have a few people, 5%, controlling most of the wealth, and then enslaving the people. That's what we have today. And what we have in Islam is a divine law, where divine law will met out divine justice. And what we have today is a man-made law called under the umbrella of democracy, giving us injustice. That's what we have today. So if we follow the argument that the Quran and the example of the Messenger Muhammad is a divine source for us, and it is from God, then it will naturally follow that that law will be just. Therefore, we should implement it upon the people, and the laws that are given to us, we should follow them because they are upon our Lord. But what we have today is the arbitrary implementing of the laws based on interest and benefits. And you can see that rampant in the court system in America, whereby the rich people, they'll be let off, and the poorer people, they're the ones who are being meted out with a punishment. You have a completely unbalanced system in America. Why do you think people are occupying Wall Street? Why do you think people are uprising in many states in America? Because they know capitalism has failed. Unemployment is so high now. The system is not workable. We have a saying, communism is dead, capitalism is dying, Islam is the only way forward. So I think with Mr. Spencer, rather than having a skewed parallel universe type of history, which he seems to have, I think he should speak to Muslims and ask Muslims what Islam is really about. And that's my final comment, really.
Thank you so much. Robert, 2 minutes, and then we'll take the next break, and then we'll come back to you on the other issues.
Thanks, Summer. I did want to defend you, actually, from Abu Bara's false charge that you cut off Anjem when he was refuting me. You actually cut off Anjem when he was simply proselytizing for Islam, and that is perfectly within your rights as the Christian television network. As far as these other things go, the idea that because Muhammad was named in a book by Michael Hart as the most influential person in history, means that he therefore must have existed. That's obviously ridiculous. Many historical myths and fables have energized people to take action in the real world, and it's certainly true that the stories of Muhammad in the Hadith and the Quran itself have had great influence over human beings, but that is no argument for their historical reliability at all. And as I show in the forthcoming book, there is actually very shaky historical foundations for Muhammad. It's very noteworthy that these people that were supposed to be energized by his example and following his teachings never mention him for 60 years after they start conquering countries. There's no explanation for that. But in any case, the idea also that many people are starving in the U.S. and that Islamic law fights against poverty, I think that these things are very amusing, really, when you think about that must explain why Saudi Arabia and Iran and Pakistan have such a problem with illegal immigrants, since people from all over the world trying to get into Sharia states. Obviously, nobody is trying to get into Sharia states, and many people who are in Sharia states are trying to get into the United States. That itself is testimony to the fact that everybody in the whole world knows that you can live better in the free West than you can in countries constituted according to Islamic law.
Thank you, Robert. 2 minutes, and we'll be right back. We have to take a break. We're live here on ABN. 248-416-1300 is our phone numbers. We have about 30 minutes left on the show, so make sure you call and speak with one of our dynamic panelists. We'll be right back.
إن الأمة بكاملها على موعد أن ترسم البسمة على كل شفاه الكون وأن تمسح الدمعة من كل عيون البشر. إن مشروعنا مشروع الدواء الذي يشفي كل داء من هذه الحضارة الغربية التي إما أن تحتوي أو أن تقتل، إما أن تسيطر أو أن تدمر، إما أن تتصادم أو أن تحتوي البشر. هذه الحضارة لا تصمد في وجه هذا الإسلام الكبير العظيم ببرنامجه الإنساني الكبير.
Are you a Christian who loves watching ABN shows? Are you eager to make a video and post it online and see it reach millions of Middle Eastern people? Or are you a Muslim who wants an outlet to ask questions, make comments, or post video responses to Christian evangelists and apologists? Well, ABN-Tube has it all. ABN-Tube is an extended media outlet of ABN TV ministry. We've gotten an overwhelming response from viewers of ABN to launch a media outlet for people like you to upload your own video responses to some of the clips we have online, whether on abnsat.com or on our ABNsat YouTube account. Our goal is to bring to light any and all lies about false religion through media, to create an open dialogue about religion among people of different faiths, and to gear them to the truth of Jesus Christ. Please visit our site at www.abntube.com. Thank you.
Jihad has come to America.
Constitutes the most devastating series of terrorist attacks in history.
The only deen Allah accepts is Al-Islam. And whoever seeks any other deen apart from Islam will never be accepted.
Allahu Akbar! And we stand together to win the war against terrorism.
But you too will make your destruction.
Okay, we are back. We'll go right to the phone calls here. We have Christian on air with us from the UK. Go ahead with your question. You can keep them short, please, because we have a lot of calls coming in.
I just want to ask question to Anjem Choudary.
Yes, go right ahead.
He's representing Islam as a Islamic scholar and want to talk about the Sharia. I just want to know about its Prophet Muhammad. What was his life was? He got number of marriages, 7-year-old, 9 years old young girl. He got married, yeah, and his adopted son wife. He got a marriage, and he got 13 marriages. So what sort of Sharia he want? He want these type of things, so 4 wives or 10 wives or 9 wives? And what he's doing here, why don't he implement Sharia in, Muslim countries? There is not a single Muslim country having Sharia. And he's talking about Sharia. He might having benefits here in the UK and just want to take all advantages and benefits, and then he just show that he is a Muslim scholar and want to deceive people here in UK or in USA. But I just want to ask, if he's honest, go and study Islam and honestly say, is any comparison between Muhammad and Jesus? Because Jesus clearly says, I am the way and the truth and the life. But Muhammad couldn't claim this type of things. He needs repentance.
Christian, thank you so much. Don't mean to cut you off. A lot of calls coming through. We appreciate your comments. We will ask Anjem to respond a little later. Do we have a second call that's coming through? Go right ahead. Yes, go right ahead. Who do we have on air?
Hi, my name is Bill Warner, and I've been watching this with some interest.
Yes, hi, Dr. Bill Warner. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, I would like to come to the practical matter in comparing democracy and theocracy, and that is to the fact of all of us need a certain amount of money, and we find that in America we have many immigrants who come here from poorer lands, and amongst them we have many Muslim immigrants. And what I'm wondering is, why do they choose to immigrate to a democracy when they could immigrate to Sharia? And another way of putting the same thing is that if we take the oil out of the gross national product of all the Arab nations, if we subtract that out, we find that the Arab nations produce less of the gross national product than that of Spain. So if Sharia is so good, why does it not produce a wealth for its people? Why does it is demonstrated that it cannot produce wealth?
Thank you so much.
My question is, if Sharia is so superior to democracy, why doesn't it produce a better economic engine?
That's a very good question. Thank you so much, Dr. Warner, for joining us. Of course, Dr. Warner is the director for politicalislam.com's website. We encourage you to check it out. I will hand that question to Anjem, and then we will take it to Robert. Go ahead, Anjem.
Yes, in fact, it's a very interesting question, but you have to look at Muslim immigration nowadays in light of the fact that our regimes are being propped up by dictators who are being supported by countries like America and Britain, and therefore their resources are being usurped, they're being oppressed. There's injustice being meted out to them, and they've been given, many of these countries have been given IMF and World Bank loans, and they cannot even pay the interest on them because of the conditions for those loans as a result of the civil wars which have been orchestrated in Muslim countries by the American and British regime. So, we can talk about the reason why Muslim countries are in poverty nowadays. But if you look back in history, you will find, for example, that Sudan used to be known as the fruit bowl of Africa when the Sharia was implemented. Ethiopia, which was once Abyssinia, used to export food and resources to the rest of Africa and even to the Middle East when the Sharia was implemented. And as my brother Abu Bara pointed out, when the Sharia was implemented, the basic rights to food, clothing and shelter were met to the extent that people were not needy. In the time of Ma'mun, very famous Khalifa, one of the very famous leaders of Islam, they were putting great cauldrons of golden dinar in the public arena. Nobody was taking anything. And in fact, Umar bin Abdul Aziz, one of the famous leaders in Islam, said, make prostration to God because Allah has eradicated poverty in our time. So, I could go on about this. On the other point, I would say that, in terms of what the first question was alluding to about Jesus and Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, all of the prophets of God asked us to submit to his commands. And Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, yes, he married someone, when she was 6, but he did not consummate the marriage until she was mature. And yes, he married more than 4 wives, and he kept some of them, and he never had a relationship with some of them because he had a message to pass to them, the whole of mankind. And in fact, polygamy is the norm. It's not something which is unusual. You can find that in many times with the previous messengers of God, and I think it's even mentioned in the Old Testament about David and about Solomon and the prophets of God. So one should not be surprised about this concept. And for someone to say about the messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam anything disparaging is not correct, because he was a mercy for mankind and he brought the people out of the darkness of oppression that they were living in among the Quraysh into the beauty and justice of Islam, to the extent that women, Samuel, I would just say to you, 1,400 years ago had the right of inheritance. They were participating in politics. The Prophet said, take half of your religion from Aisha, and she was only 18 years old when he passed away. So they have the most highest and most esteemed status in Islam and in our history, unlike what I could say about the civilization nowadays. And I think all of the prophets of God had essentially the same message, to bring people out of the injustice of man-made law into the beauty of divine law.
Thank you, Anjem. Robert, mic's all yours.
Okay, thank you. In the first place, it's noteworthy. I want to help out Anjem here in that he said that that Muhammad did marry Aisha when she was 6, but did not consummate the marriage until she was mature, he said. He neglected to say, and it's of course in Bukhari, the Hadith collection that Muslims consider to be most reliable and normative for Islamic law and practice. Although again, these things have no historical value, but that's an aside. It says actually that he consummated the marriage when she was 9 and he was 54. And that is the basis. That's, he or Abu Bara, actually I forget which one, was railing against pedophilia before in the West. But actually there are no statistics for pedophilia in Muslim countries because it's officially sanctioned. The Ayatollah Khomeini, when he became the ruler of the Islamic Republic of Iran, one of the first things he did was lower the legal marriageable age of girls to 9 in imitation of Muhammad. In Afghanistan, after the Taliban was toppled in 2003, Aid workers went into the refugee camps. They found half the girls of second grade age were married. Virtually all the girls who were older than that were already married. This is an imitation of Muhammad. As far as my friend Bill Warner's question, it's noteworthy that there is poverty that's marked by Sharia, that Sharia states are marked by poverty with the exception of the oil states. And that's no accident because there's no work ethic that's inculcated by Sharia. Actually, Sharia mandates, Islamic law mandates based on the Quran, Surah 9, verse 29, that non-Muslims must live in a state of submission to Islam and pay a special tax, the jizya, that Muslims are exempt from paying. And that was the basis of the economic system. As a matter of fact, there is a hadith in which Muhammad says, be sure to collect the jizya because it will be the source of the livelihood for you and your descendants. And there's a clear historical correlation that when the non-Muslim communities were indeed numerous and relatively wealthy, but were subjugated under the rule of Islamic law, and they were made to pay this tax, then the Islamic empires prospered and were economic powerhouses. But when those communities were bled dry by this payment of the jizya and the kharaj, a related tax, then the Islamic empires went into decline. They had no work ethic of their own. They were only supporting themselves on the backs of the non-Muslims. And this is why they need to wage jihad today in order to conquer Western countries and bleed them dry so that the Islamic states can again return to prosperity. But they have no cultural work ethic of their own. Islamic law does not teach that work is noble in itself or that it has a value in itself, such that people do work except out of necessity in general as a cultural attitude. And so the idea of poverty as being something that's accidental in Sharia is a little bit out of focus. Actually, poverty and Sharia go hand in hand unless there is a non-Muslim community that can be sufficiently bled to keep the poverty at bay.
Thank you, Robert. We have to go on to our next call. We actually have Alfred from Germany back on with us. Go right ahead, sir.
Hello, I am on it.
If you could just turn your audio down from your end on your set because there's about a 10-second delay.
I have questions to Mr. Anjem Choudary.
Yes.
I know in Islam is death plenty. What about the case in Pakistan, Mr. Raymond Davis? He killed 2 Pakistani on street, and the case goes to Sharia's law. He got the death penalty. And then he paid $2 million American dollars, and the court let it go in the Islamic law of adiyat. This means you can buy the Allah's law or Islamic law with the dollars. Why that?
Okay, stay on the line. Anjem, did you get that?
I got that, yes. And
Okay,
basically,
thank you, sir.
let me just start by saying that Pakistan is not implementing the Sharia. Let's be clear about that. Izzadee is one of the most corrupted, barbaric, oppressive non-Muslims ever to rule, over Muslim land. This is the first point. Secondly, the cases which run through the courts are obviously judged by secular law. Now, this judge, he may say it's Sharia, but under the Sharia, there's no concept of just buying yourself freedom from the court. There's a concept of qisas. Qisas is reciprocation. In other words, if you murder someone as a Muslim, for example, you murder a fellow Muslim, then the court offers the family of the person who's deceased either to take the blood money, which is 100 camels, of which 40 are pregnant, or to elect reciprocation. And you can see, for example, in certain places like Somalia, where they're implementing that, you have the beautiful system where, in fact, the family have forgiven the perpetrator, and you end up, with love and brotherhood, which is completely unheard of in democracy and man-made law. We have something which is balanced between Christianity on the one hand, which says, just turn the other cheek and, give him the other cheek, etc. And the Jews, which have no choice at all, they have reciprocation. On the other hand, Islam is balanced, meaning that the family have a choice either to forgive or to take the blood money, or to take reciprocation, and this is something unique, and that is superior.
Robert, any comments here, or should we take the next call?
Here again, I'd like to help Anjem out. He's leaving out an important part. The blood money may be some wonderful system that fosters harmony and reconciliation, but it also should be noted that if you're paying blood money, if you have killed a Muslim, you have to pay more than if you've killed a Christian, or if you've killed a Jew, or if you've killed a Hindu. And there is a sliding scale that is specified in Islamic law that is very clear that the life of a non-Muslim is not valued as much as the life of a Muslim in Islamic law. And this is precisely why the theocracy that they are advocating is actually tyranny for non-Muslims and should be resisted at all costs by all free people.
Thank you, Robert. Why don't we take our next call? We have Sam on air with us. Go right ahead, Sam.
Hi, I got a question for Anjem.
Yes, go right ahead.
Anjem, the question I have for you is, let's see if the Sharia was implemented. Would you have a law requiring women to produce 4 witnesses who had actually witnessed the rape happen, and those men had to be good character? The reason I ask you a question is because, Sayyid Munawar Hussain, in a recent interview in a Pakistani channel, in his opposition to the removal of Hudud ordinance, had stated that if a woman cannot produce 4 witnesses who had witnessed the rape, then the woman should keep quiet. If I can have your input on that.
Yes, I will turn the mic to Anjem.
Yeah, basically, I think you need to distinguish between adultery in Islam and fornication and rape. And I don't want to go into a long protracted explanation of each, but basically as far as rape is concerned, there are only 2 witnesses required, or 1 witness and circumstantial evidence, or even confession. So there are many ways in which rape can be proved, and if it is proven, then the man will face capital punishment. There is never any punishment for the woman whatsoever, if she comes forward and she cannot prove the rape. Obviously, there may be false testimony. If that is proven, then there may be punishment. But ultimately, if a woman is attacked, and if she cannot prove rape, but she can prove that she's been attacked, for example, there will be other punishments. So this idea that the woman cannot come forward or she will be punished instead, if she accuses someone of rape, is completely absurd. And we can only hear that really from the West and people who have an axe to grind against the Sharia. The Sharia is a perfect way of life, and the rape as well is something which has very strict conditions. And obviously we can go through more of them, but I think this is a misunderstanding from the gentleman.
Why do you need 1 witness at all in a rape incident? Why does DNA not suffice?
Well, I mean, there are 4 types of evidences under the Sharia. There's self-confession, there's an oath, there's a witness evidence, or there's mustanadat, which is irrefutable circumstantial evidence, which you may call, for example, if someone is pregnant, for example, or if you have documents signed by witnesses and so on. So there are other evidences as well which have been taken into consideration, but the law on the issue of rape needs at least 1 witness, and that's the divine law of God. It's not for me to judge something which is made from someone who knows better, because he created us in the first place.
Robert, why is there this assumption then that you need 4 witnesses in a rape incident, for example, in Islam?
Well, that comes from chapter 24 of the Quran in verse 4 and verse 13, which specifies that you have to have 4 witnesses. The hadith supporting this and elucidating these 2 verses explains that there was an incident in which Aisha, Muhammad's favorite wife, the child who he married, was accused of adultery. And Muhammad was very upset. He did not want to put her to death. And so he got this revelation from Allah that that the accusers needed 4 witnesses. Apparently, they didn't have 4 witnesses, and so he was able to exonerate Aisha on that basis. But Muslim women have suffered because of this ever since. Anjem, unfortunately, is not quite correct when he says that there are no women who were victimized because of their accusations of rape. Actually, Sisters in Islam, which is a reformist group in Malaysia, estimates that as many as 75% of the women who are in prison in states like Pakistan and others are in prison because they were raped, but because their accusation cannot be proven according to the Islamic canons of evidence as specified by the Quran. And so their accusation itself becomes self-condemning, and they are in prison. And so this is a terrible system for women that perpetuates their oppression. Pakistan is not indeed a Sharia state, but it does implement many Sharia laws. And so there were actually riots, and Islamic clerics protested a few years back when the Musharraf regime tried to take rape out of the category of crimes that would be judged according to Islamic law, according to the Hudud laws, and to put it to judge it according to modern standards of forensic evidence. And this was something that was hotly protested by Muslims in Pakistan.
Turn it out to Abu Bara as we're closing the program. If you can give us your final comments and final words here on why you believe in a theocratic structure and not a democratic structure.
No. Thank you. Yes, I mean, I do just want to touch on what Robert just mentioned, and I'm glad he made the point about Pakistan and other countries like Pakistan.
You just have 2 minutes, though, because we have to end the program.
Yes, because Pakistan is a proud and self-professed democracy. They are proud of their democracy, and they call for democracy, and they declare that they only rule by the law of the people. And they only introduce some of the laws because the general masses and all the people, they wish to have Sharia, and the only way to try and finance any kind of opposition for Pakistani regime is to introduce some of these laws, and they try to brush the people off by using this kind of law. So Pakistan is an excellent example of why democracy does not work when people make their own laws with their own hands. Even if they try to Islamicize it and to impress some people, it doesn't work. The other thing I wanted to make is regarding the economic model of democracy compared to Islam. Remember, we are talking about a time where the whole world, democratic world, is in a depression, in a recession because of interest and a capitalist-based society. The U.S. is in debt for $15 trillion. That is $50,000 per citizen. We're talking about a failed ideology. Democracy does not work economically. You cannot bring an argument about the economic model when your own economic model is a complete failure. On the other hand, Islam historically has always flourished. Countries which under democracy are now failing, like Sudan and Ethiopia and Somalia, they were flourishing under Islam, and they were exporting the food and they were exporting the resources, and the whole world was living off their own resources. So there's no doubt that the Islamic model for economy is much more superior. The fact that the interest and usury is eradicated and the wealth is distributed and managed correctly, preventing the wealth from only being circulating among the rich, would have completely eradicated the idea of a credit crunch in the world today. Islam was the only solution for the world today, the only solution for America and the economic problems of the world. The poverty in the Muslim countries nowadays, because of interest and the exploitation by America and the Western countries of those countries. They are in debt to them with interest much more than any other expense to those countries. That is the reason why they're impoverished, because America has been stealing their resources, stealing their money for all of these years, and even with that theft, they are still in debt $15 trillion. So there's no way that anybody can see the economic model of Islam as anything but superior to anything that the West or the democracy has ever had to offer.
Thank you, sir. Anjem, 1 minute, and we have to turn it to Robert.
Yes, very briefly, I think that ultimately the question is, we all need to have happiness in this life and success in this life and success in the hereafter. And therefore, the question is, do we continue with democracy? In other words, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's and give unto God what is God's? Or do we believe that sovereignty and supremacy belongs to God in all spheres of life? I would just simply say that if you want to get rid of things like pornography, gambling, usury, exploitation, economically, socially, the propping up of dictatorial regimes, then you need to do away with the system which feeds those, which is democracy. And therefore choose the divine law, and the only one which really deals with the divine law in terms of ruling is Islam. So I think Islam is the solution, and democracy has failed and is seen to be failing.
Isn't pornography internet searches #1 in Pakistan, which in Pakistan it's majority Muslim? And
I would not be surprised, because it's fed into Muslim countries free of charge, whereas in the West you have to pay for it. But I can tell you something, over 50% of child porn is in America, not in Pakistan.
But in Islam, child porn, okay, we don't have time. Robert, 2 minutes and we have to end the show. We might have to do a part 2 on this series. Go right ahead.
Yes, thank you, Summer. Here again, these gentlemen all through the evening, and of course I didn't expect anything different, are opposing what they call the rule of man and man-made law to the law of God and the rule of divine law. But it's not proven, and it's not established, and it's certainly not universally agreed upon that Islamic law really is divine law. It may be true, as Anjem says, that sovereignty and supremacy belongs to God, but that does not mean that we need to submit to Islam, because Islam is not from God. And so those of us who do not believe that Islam is from God would be oppressed and would be denied basic rights under Sharia, and we would be denied the freedom of speech, the freedom of conscience, various basic rights. And so that's not justice, and that's not an ideal system for society by any stretch of the imagination. It was also noteworthy and amusing when Abu Bara said there's no way anybody can see, no way that anybody cannot see, rather, that the economic system of Islam is superior. Everybody sees that. Well, actually, I don't. And so at least there's one who doesn't see that the economic system of Islam is superior. I think it's drastically inferior, that the poverty of Islamic states proves that. And the upshot here again is that what if I don't agree? I don't agree that Islam is from God. I don't agree that the economic system of Islam is superior. So what Anjem Choudary or Abu Bara would do to me would be to kill me or essentially enslave me under the laws of dimitude. This is, here again, not justice. This is not an ideal system. An ideal system would be one in which all all human beings are guaranteed equality of rights before the law and equality of dignity as human beings. And that is the system that prevails in the West for all its many acknowledged and obvious flaws. It is the system that's far superior to the Islamic legal system.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us this evening. I want to remind our viewers, we have to go for the night. I want to remind our viewers, in 2 weeks from this evening, November 30th, Wednesday at 7 p.m., Dr. Izzadee Jasser will be with us. The topic and all details will be posted on abnsat.com. Thank you for joining us tonight. Our topic, democracy or theocracy. We will let you make the final decision. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to call us or email us to jihadexposed@abnsat.com. Thank you so much. Good night.
Jihad has come to America.
Constitutes the most devastating series of terrorist attacks in history.
The only deen Allah accepts is Al-Islam. And whoever seeks any other deen apart from Islam will never be accepted.
Allahu Akbar!
And we stand together to win the war against terrorism.
But you so